Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Izraelska vojska je od početka agresije na Palestince u Gazi ubila više od 15.000 ljudi, pretežno civila, i stvorila humanitarnu krizu koja će se sa vremenom samo pogoršati. Da li postupci Izraela naginju etničkom čišćenju ili čak genocidu? Detaljnije o tome razgovaramo sa Omerom Bartovom, profesorom studija holokausta i genocida na uglednom američkom Univerzitetu Brown. Professor Bartov, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera channel. Thank you so much for taking time to speak to us. Now, you have warned that Israel's assault on the Gaza Strip is at risk of becoming a genocide. How would you explain the driving force behind Israel's right-wing government officials and hawkish military leaders in being so adamant on annihilating Gaza and destroying any forms of resistance that come from the Palestinians living in Gaza?
Hi, and thank you, first of all, for having me. Look, I mean, I think that there are several aspects to this. One is to do specifically with the attack by Hamas on October 7th. And that was an atrocious attack. It was, I think, could be defined as a crime against humanity and a war crime. And that created a particular atmosphere in Israel. It also, in large part, collapsed the entire concept that the Netanyahu government has had for a long time, really for 20 years, which was that it could manage the conflict, so to speak, by keeping Hamas caged in Gaza under siege for 16 years. And every once in a while, as Israeli military leaders called it, mow the grass, that is, bring about enough destruction to, so to speak, put them back in their place. But at the same time, keep Hamas strong enough so that Israel could say that with such an enemy, it had no choice but to fight it, since it was also not willing to compromise, and to keep the Palestinian Authority weak enough in the West Bank so as to say that they're too corrupt and weak, and therefore Israel can continue settlements in the West Bank with the intention of finally annexing much of it. So that whole concept collapsed on October 7th. And the question is, where do you go from there? And the Israeli government has not provided any political plan for the future. It is only providing military actions. And those military actions, as you know, have been particularly destructive for the civilian population of Gaza. Where this leads is a question. I think that Israel would need to be compelled to provide a political plan for finally a resolution of the conflict. But that is not where this government is heading. This government is trying to both remove Hamas from Gaza, which as such is not a bad idea because Hamas is not a partner for any negotiations, but then it really appears to want either to return to the previous situation, which is probably impossible, or possibly to move the civilian population of Gaza entirely out of Gaza, and then to have that as land for future settlement.
Right. So why, when you say that when you earlier warned about that the Israeli army was committing ethnic cleansing, what exactly did you have in mind? Did you see a clear intent from Israeli political and military leaders on destroying a part or a whole of a nation?
Yeah, so what I was trying to say in my previous writing on this is the following. There were very threatening statements by Israeli political and military leaders, people in top positions, both dehumanizing Gaza, and there is a kind of slide between them saying that they're talking only about Hamas and really speaking about the population of Gaza as a whole. They've never been very accurate in that. So dehumanizing the population, speaking of them as human animals, and then speaking about flattening Gaza, destroying Gaza, removing Gaza, all kinds of statements that would seem to have or to indicate genocidal intent. On the ground, the army kept saying that what it is trying to do is only to hit military Hamas targets, but that because Hamas is in highly populated, densely populated areas, there was a great deal of collateral damage. And here, proportionately, the numbers of civilian casualties are so high that it's very hard to speak of proper proportionality between the military goals and the loss of civilian lives. So that is something that verges or is potentially war crimes. But Israel also, the Israeli military has also implemented the policy of removing the Palestinian population of the northern part of the Gaza Strip into the southern part. It claimed to do it for humanitarian reasons, that is, so as to save them from this collateral damage. But it has meanwhile also destroyed well over half of the built-up area in the northern part of Gaza, that is the homes that those people were displaced from, and it has not made any commitment to allow them to return to their homes. So now you have about 1.7 or 1.8 million Palestinians displaced, mostly crammed into southern parts of the Gaza Strip with no plan as to what will happen next to them. So this can be seen as potentially an operation of ethnic cleansing. And ethnic cleansing, if this continues, can and has in the past deteriorated or developed into genocide. So we are at a point where, and I think there are serious discussions about that, I think there's a great deal of American pressure on Israel not to pursue a policy that the American administration can see could devolve into ethnic cleansing.
All right, Professor, back in the 1990s, during Serbia's aggression in Bosnia, many Western media outlets used terms such as ethnic cleansing, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and eventually genocide. Some Bosnian intellectuals have argued that ethnic cleansing is merely a euphemism for genocide, a term invented to sanitize a horrible crime. I mean, I was wondering if you could, elaborate on their differences, because sometimes journalists don't seem to really be aware of their very, very important differences between these very terms.
Yes, I think that's an important question. And as you know, actually, the term ethnic cleansing came into general use during the wars in Bosnia. So that's the origin, although similar terms were used already in World War I, but not specifically this one. I would say that the main distinction, as I see it, between ethnic cleansing, about which there is no UN resolution, it is defined within the Rome Statute on crimes against humanity, whereas for genocide, there is a specific UN resolution from 1948. But the main difference between them, I would say, is that ethnic cleansing is the attempt to remove a particular group, usually an ethnic or religious group, from a territory, because the people doing that removal want that territory for themselves, or they're mixed in with them. And once this group leaves, then it can go wherever it likes. The people removing it don't really care anymore. Genocide is the intent to destroy in whole or in part a group, an ethnic or religious group. That means that that group would be destroyed wherever it is. And it adds to that it's an intent to destroy that group as such. That is, that you're not killing people because you want to kill these particular individuals. You're killing them as members of that group, or you are trying to lead to the extinction in other ways. So that's the difference. The point is that often, and that happened in several genocides. It happened in German Southwest Africa with the genocide of the Herero in 1904. It happened in the Armenian genocide in 1915. Often the attempt to ethnically cleanse a group becomes genocide either because you push people into areas where they are likely to die, or because you have no place to move them to, as happened with the Jews in World War II, and therefore you decide that the so-called most humane policy, as the Nazis called it, is to kill them.
Mm-hmm. Now, Professor, when you say that in Israel's assault on Gaza, there are elements of ethnic cleansing, we've also seen a lot of wanton destruction of civilian infrastructure. I was wondering, I mean, does this create a fertile, and of course, people being pushed towards the south of the Strip. I was wondering, does this create a fertile ground for more vigorous resistance from these very young Palestinians who will become of age within 10 to 15 years?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, the sort of policy that Israel is pursuing now has two aspects to it. One aspect is the alleged attempt to destroy Hamas as a hegemon, a political and military hegemon in Gaza. And in the attempt to do that, Israel is creating as many enemies, insurgents, terrorists, however you call them, as it is killing, probably many more. So this generally, and so-called anti-insurgency operations, is usually the result. But the second part of it is that the only way to actually stop the cycle and the both killing and then the creation of more and more resistance to that is to provide a political framework for that. It's to change the entire political paradigm. That is crucial. Once you change the political paradigm, you're actually changing the situation on the ground as well, and people's attitudes and responses to what is going on. Now, that cannot be done right now with the current Israeli leadership, which is totally engaged. I mean, the people sitting next to Netanyahu are Jewish supremacists. These are people who really want to settle the whole country and have as few Palestinians there as possible. So that totally discredited political leadership in Israel, since it failed so miserably on October 7th, has to be removed. And the same has to be done with Hamas. Hamas has discredited itself too entirely by an operation that was an absolutely outrageous set of murders, also sexual crimes and so forth. Once these two top leaders, these two, the Israeli government and Hamas, are removed from the scene, there has to be a political plan for a settlement between Israel and the Palestinians. If that is in place, then I think we will begin to see things very differently. But if it is not, then we can expect however this war ends, and it will end eventually, ever more violence and ever more killing on a larger and larger scale.
Now, Professor, in August you joined, actually you led a group of other leading historians on Israel, in the Holocaust. You signed a letter criticizing the regime of apartheid in Israel. I mean, I was wondering what motivated you to sort of warn the rest of the world on the state of affairs in Israel today. And I remember reading an interview with Archbishop Tutu from South Africa a couple of years ago, when he said that following a visit to the West Bank, he found it far worse than it was in his native South Africa during the apartheid regime.
Yeah, I didn't lead this group. I was one of four original sort of crafters of that statement. For us, it was a very important statement, and indeed close to 3,000 people signed it, many highly respectable scholars of genocide, of the Holocaust, of Jewish history. What we said in that statement was that the opposition to, people now forget it, but between February and October 2023, the Netanyahu government was trying to do a so-called judicial overhaul, which actually meant weakening the judiciary and strengthening the executive and giving him more or less absolute powers. And what we said was that although the opposition to this, which was quite massive in Israel, was impressive, it was refusing to face the elephant in the room, that the elephant in the room was the occupation. And the occupation was what was actually leading this judicial reform, because once Netanyahu and the people around him could remove the judicial opposition to what they were doing, they would go on to annexing large parts of the West Bank and very aggressive policies against Palestinians, which would lead to their removal, that is to ethnic cleansing. And we call the regime that had been created in the West Bank an apartheid regime. That is a regime in which people, Jews and Palestinians, live under two totally different laws. Jews live under democratic law as Israeli citizens, although they're extraterritorial by international law, and Palestinians live under military law. And you know, one of the interesting things right now is that the list of 300 people that Israel gave to Hamas of Palestinian prisoners who would be returned in exchange for hostages, it appears that about 80% of those people have never stood trial. They're under administrative arrest, something you cannot do to citizens, to keep people for years in jail without even a trial. So these are completely different sets of laws, and that would be, I can't compare it to South Africa. Archbishop Tutu had his own experience, but it is a brutal apartheid regime in the West Bank.
Now, we talked about those massive demonstrations against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which have been going on since early this year. I mean, I was wondering, have the October 7th attacks, united a very divided Israeli society? I came across authors, left-wing authors, who were very critical of Israel, who were in a way pro-Palestinian, people from Haaretz and elsewhere, who are now openly supportive of the military assault on Gaza and of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So have the October 7th attacks inadvertently united Israel and united the Israeli society?
Well, that's a complicated question. I don't think that anybody is united in Israel behind Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu actually, from some polls that have been published, has maybe 13% support in the country. So I think as if he were to go to elections now, he would be ousted from power right away. But Israelis since October 7th feel A, that they were attacked brutally, B, they feel a deep sense of insecurity, and there is also a sort of desire, I think, for vengeance. And these kind of sentiments can unite people. I don't think it's a permanent sentiment. I think that the next stage in Israeli politics, there is so much rage against this regime, the Israeli government, that brought Israel to that point. There's also great anger at the army for having failed Israeli citizens so terribly. It took hours and hours for the military to get to those settlements that were attacked. It's only a 90-minute drive from Tel Aviv to those settlements, but it took the army sometimes 8, sometimes 12 hours to get there. And so I think that there is going to be a political earthquake in Israel. The question is which way it will go, and you're right that there are people on the Israeli left, whatever is left of the Israeli left, which is not much, who have sort of right now joined the multitude in saying, Palestinians, we cannot talk with those people. We've now been awakened from our illusions and so forth. That is happening. I'm hoping that the direction of Israeli society will not be more to the right, to a more authoritarian, militaristic society, but the other way, to realizing that there is no way of solving this conflict with Palestinians, with the 7 million Palestinians in areas controlled by Israel and 7 million Jews. They have to learn to live together. And I hope that people living in Israel after October 7th, when they come to their senses, will realize that's the only way they can ensure peace and justice for both groups.
Now, as we move closer to the end of our interview, I wanted to ask you about dissenting opinion within Israel. I came across an article regarding Professor Nurit Peled El-Hanan. I believe she teaches at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She was a winner of European Parliament's Sakharov Prize some time ago for human rights. She was given a rather severe reprimand from her university, accused of, quote, displaying understanding for Hamas's horrific attack and expressing justification to this heinous act simply for writing in a WhatsApp group that Hamas's attacks was the result of decades of occupation and oppression. I was wondering, are such forms of internal dissent, so to say, being silenced more often than we know?
Yes, and it's been happening. This has been coming not only from, say, the police that are now monitoring WhatsApp groups and disciplining people who are expressing any sympathy with the fate of Palestinians in Gaza, much of which, by the way, is not reported at all on the Israeli media. It's coming also from, say, university leaders, from presidents and rectors of universities who are trying to discipline those members of faculty who are expressing some worry and anxiety about the fate of Palestinian civilians. It is happening. I've had it myself. I was, so to speak, reprimanded by Yad Vashem, by the Institute for the Study of the Holocaust in Jerusalem, for what I've been writing. So yeah, there are attempts to intimidate people into not speaking about what Israel is doing in Gaza. I hope in the long run it will fail, and certainly colleagues of mine and myself have been putting pressure on those leaders, certainly of universities in Israel, which are supposed to be left-wing bastions, or at least liberal bastions of Israeli society, to realize that they have to allow freedom of speech and allow people to express their opinions about what is happening in Gaza right now.
But now even civil rights groups in the US have warned of a wave of McCarthyite backlash against criticism of Israel's bombardment of Gaza after Americans expressing support for the Palestinians have been sacked, have faced threats of violence and hounded by pro-Israel groups. Why is this happening now, and how can the public still be free to criticize Israel and the actions of the Israeli military and not be accused of anti-Semitism?
Well, you know, I was also a signatory on a statement just recently that spoke precisely on the sort of misuse of the terms anti-Semitism, Holocaust, and genocide. All of these three terms have been misused by everyone. There is an attempt, which actually had been sort of launched by the Israeli government some years ago, to argue that all criticism of Israeli policies is anti-Semitic. And that, of course, is nonsense. You can be a Zionist, you can be a patriot in Israel, and be very critical of Israeli government policies. That has filtered into Germany in large part. There are many attempts in Germany right now to sort of control speech about Israel, and to the United States. And you know, people in the United States do have freedom of speech and have to stand up against it. It is also true that there has been a significant rise in anti-Semitism, both in Europe and in the United States. Most of that anti-Semitism is not coming from groups that are supportive of Palestinians. They come from mostly from neo-Nazi extreme right-wing groups, but those who want to protect Israel attribute them to pro-Palestinian sentiments. So everyone is trying to use those terms to their own advantage. And I think that certainly in the United States, there are attempts now to stop this kind of monitoring of speech and to allow people to say and protest against what they believe is wrong.
Right, Professor Bartov, I really enjoyed speaking to you. Thank you so much once again for your time.
Thank you very much.